The following is an analysis of the film Twilight, directed by Catherine Harwick, based on the saga of novels by Stephanie Meyer. This is a twofold analysis, according to two different theories that, coincidentally, studied the same phenomena but from two different fields of knowledge. However, these come to the same conclusions, as it would be obvious, but, if we consulted the staunchest of both theories, they would be quite skeptical with regard to this, because they discredit their sciences as being unscientific. In this case, it's psychoanalysis and morphology. These sciences are structural anthropology and semiotics, developed by the morphological linguist, A.J. Grimes, based on Morphology of Russian Folk Tales by Vladimir Propp. In addition, the French structuralist and anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, also had added his contribution to these theories. The second analysis is based on analytical psychoanalysis, developed by the Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Gustav Jung, one of Sigmund Freud's main disciples. The film is divided into sequences in which meaning is highlighted. For example, Bella goes to a boutique to try on dresses for the prom, but she is distracted and opts better for leaving to a bookstore. Bella walks through a dark alley and sees some dangerous men. They corner her, but Edward appears in his car, rescuing her. 1. Interrogatory versus information equals Bella is more interested in information about Edward than in the prom equals information equals love. 2. Main test 2 versus victory equals Edward saves Bella from danger again equals life, protector equals love, and Bella equals protector of helpless. 3. Bella sees Edward at school, going towards the forest. Edward follows her. She confronts him with what she has found out about him. She asks him how old is he, replying he is 17 years old. Bella asks him how long he has been so, answering her too long. Edward asks her what she thinks he is, and Bella answers he is a vampire. Edward asks her if she is afraid of him and Bella says no. Edward performs a demonstration of his powers, running at high speed through the woods and carrying her. He stops under a ray of sunlight, showing her how he sparkles. Edward says he is the most deadly predator, showing her how he could be able to kill her. Edward says he is thirsty for her blood, and wants her more than anything else. However, Bella says she can confide in him, but Edward says he does not know for how long he will be able to control himself. Edward says he can read her mind. Bella says she does not fear him and is more afraid of losing him. 1. Main test 3, crossing of threshold, interrogatory versus information, versus victory equals getting of truth equals absolute love. 2. Interrogatory versus information equals Edward is not normal but is a life, protector equals absolute life equals absolute love equals protector of helpless. 3. Interrogatory versus information equals Edward is dangerous equals potential absolute death. 4. Interrogatory versus information equals Bella is not afraid equals trust equals love, certainty equals confirmation of state of helplessness. As you can see, none of what happens in the film is incidental. Each sequence exemplifies an indoctrinating thesis based on their semantic content, based on the struggle of two antipodal theses in which one is opposed against the other, reaffirming a pedagogical and moral indoctrination within the story. But how is this done, one might wonder? Simple. The film, as we will see it, is just a concatenation of series of pairs of opposites in conflict, in which one prevails over another. Which ones? All. In reality and ordinary life, everything is torn apart by two pairs of opposites that want to impose over another, but since this is an unending struggle, none wins eternally, none of them wins, and everything ends up being in an intermediate zone in which both prevail, simultaneously, achieving a healthy and hygienic state of homeostasis. In this, two things exist simultaneously and not at the same time. For example, water. Water is the most basic example and the most important of all, because if water lacked of such quality, life simply would be impossible. In order for life to exist, water must be liquid, that is, it should not destroy the complex but fragile organic molecules to be beneficial, allowing organic processes to go on. Yes, physiological processes, such as respiration within the cell, the most elementary and basic unit of life, COULDN, to be possible if water were solid. If the world had been extremely cold, water would be solid, losing the qualities that allow organic processes to happen. It would be ice and such processes would stall, leading to the cell's demise. On the other hand, if water becomes extremely hot as steam is, it would destroy organic molecules that allow cell's life, as sugars, proteins or DNA. Then we can see which pairs of opposites in conflict are in this case. They would be heat versus cold. As it is known, none of them exist actually. They are simply two opposite scales of the same phenomenon, that is, temperature. They are simply two grades to which the process of temperature direct in both ways, that is, upwards and downwards. The one who determines if a thing is such is merely the observer. Yes, a watcher who makes such a judgment concerning this field of expertise. In order to make life possible on Earth, none of these opposites should dominate the other, or the world would be too hostile and unstable to sustain life as we know it. The same thing happens in each sequence. The main pair of opposites are two. Love versus hate and life versus death, in which love and life are equivalent as hatred and death are as well. As it? Obvious, absolute love, that is, the utopia of the absolute love and peace that reigned in the universe. Would it be only a childish utopia, something so utterly unreal, since there is also hate and evil in the world, its direct opposite, and denying the existence of hate and evil would be unrealistic and childish, as most idealists are. However, we should treasure the high ideal of love so there can be a state in which life can be possible, and not destroyed. As it is a case of civilization, which human beings have created and in which complex human life thrives. Therefore, these two poles must be accepted and not denied so that the human individual could be developed to reach a mature and realistic mindset, so he or she would not be so overwhelmed by his or hers unrealizable ideals. In such a case, we would run the risk of falling into a state of utter hopelessness as we face the wickedness of the world. This dreadful state of chaos could terrorize us to such an extent that would make something impossible to cope with reality for us. Therefore, if love imposed in a story, that is the meaning highlighted in a struggle between opposites, throughout the narrative are presented these battles of opposites in which a pair wins, and, ultimately, as we perform the summation of all these results, the result is that none of them wins but both are nullified, being the result zero. This means that both coexist and prevail in our world simultaneously, as it takes place truly in our daily reality, in which, after all, nothing idealistic really exists, but merely inside our heads. However, how can this be so, since the result of this struggle seems to be always the triumph of goodness over evil, as it takes place always in fairy tales and Hollywood films? But this is something that only take place in fiction, not real life. In these stories there is always a villain who opposes to the hero's happiness. The hero is not always victorious, but there are battles he loses at hands of the villain. But, at the end, our beloved hero finishes overcoming evil and achieving happiness. Why so? Well, a psychological explanation for all of this is that, in reality, both villain and hero are not real human beings but idealistic concepts or projections known as archetypes or actants. That is, mere pieces of our unconscious mind, and, throughout our ripening process, we must learn to cope with the conflicting forces within our psyches. The hero represents the good side of the individual, who, although anarchists and conservative Christians refuse to admit it, is not good at all, even ourselves. Yes, there is part of pure evil in all of us, but let's not be moralists and say that the hero, along with his assistants, the helpers, such as mentors or wise elders, represent forces that exist in nature that nourish and give life to us. They help us to supply our physiological and emotional needs, while the villain and his minions represents everything that in nature deny us the satisfaction of our needs or even threatens to wipe out our life itself. In teen films, bullies are the villains par excellence. They always humiliate the hero, preventing him to get the love of his lady. While the hero, as friends, parents, teachers and mature friends, help him to conquer love. That is, heat and cold, love and hatred. The result is one in which the hero gets his damsel and manages to preserve his genes for the next generation, genes that will confront the same series of dilemmas in which pairs of opposites would make the hero feel torn apart until he or she reaches an intermediate stability in which life is possible and widespread, that is, the yin and yang. On the other hand, the semiotic morphology considers that the characters are the actants, and that the outcome of the struggle is a highlighted meaning, in The Raw and the Cooked, which is a book about the mythology of the peoples of the Amazon jungle, written by Claude Love Strauss. Grimes analyzes one myth and gets as result that the pair of opposites highlighted are raw versus cooked. Why is this so important? Well, this is something vital so it can be a civilization in an environment as hostile as the Amazon jungle is. Raw represents death, since the prevailing heat rots what is raw, making it toxic, poisonous, and hindering life itself there, while cooked allows heat not to destroy their food sources, allowing human life to be civilized in an environment as wild and perilous such as this. Meanwhile, Jungian analytical psychoanalysis considers that the characters in the stories are archetypes. The result of the struggle is to achieve a healthy state of individuation or maturity. The hero's path, as in Joseph Campbell's book is told, The Hero of Thousand Faces, takes us from being immature infants to be responsible adults, capable of confronting the world and survive in it. At the same time, we will be able to cope with the challenge of being parents ourselves. The journey is an allegory of a vision quest in which adolescence crosses the liminal threshold of childhood towards adulthood. We leave our parents' home to travel to the outside world, that is, into reality. We are performing such a trip in order to find inner wisdom, but the trick is that this wisdom lies hidden inside us. It's our unconscious, but we can hear it in our normal environment because we are deeply concentrated only with our most immediate things. Only as we travel into wilderness we take heed of it. Therefore, one faces the outside world as an antagonist, that is, our unconscious, and, as we defeat both, we prove to be able to deal with them, that is, being mature. Only then, we can go back home, taking with us the miracle of our newly found and achieved wisdom. Once given this explanation regarding our method, we will analyze Twilight twice, by semiotic morphology method and analytical psychoanalysis method. First, we have to pinpoint which are its main actants or archetypes, And then we can proceed. Actant or archetypes 1 Protagonist Bella Swan 2 Helper or Teacher Jacob Black, Father, Mother, Carlisle Cullen Friends, Edward Cullen 3 The Wanted Object Edward Cullen 4, Antagonist James, Victoria, Rival Vampires 5 Ignored Person Jacob Black 6, Father Charlie Swan The confrontation of opposing pairs was as it follows. Result Love, plus 94 Lovelessness 50 equals plus 44 Life. Plus 45 Death 55 equals 10 Self-sufficient, plus 4 Helplessness 42 equals 38 Normal Oh not normal 4 equals 4 Young. Plus 5 Old, 0 equals plus 5 Total positives plus 148 Total negatives 151 equals 3 As you can see, the result is almost a perfect 0. Although, there is a trend toward negativity over positive. In terms of each pair separately, it is highlighted the pair self-sufficiency versus dependency strikingly. The negative is emphasized, predominating overwhelmingly over the positive side as an anomaly that predominates during the whole story. Although, that is to forestalling the conclusions of this analysis actential in the story, there is a problem of immaturity that the main character never solves. Bella manages to be loved by the wanted person, but that love is never a sign of maturity but the other way around. It is a blatant evidence of dependence and childishness. Bella solves her problem of lovelessness, but this is something disingenuous because it's only apparently. Immaturity was not the cause of lovelessness, no, on the contrary, the more immature Bella is in her behaviors, the more compassion inspires for her utter helplessness. Yes, the more destitute she is in life. She is loved the most. In such a way, she is the worst example for a perky and cocky girl who wants to be dangerous and independent. In our modern world, the main character does not attain self-realization during the story, leaving behind her childish attitude of dependence regarding life. No, but only when she reaches love. Therefore, these are false comprehension and more a self-delusion. The more immature, childish and not being herself is she, the more mercy, protection and love she inspires to her protector-wanted object lover. The hero is actually the wanted object since Bella is too passive as to perform the function of universe transformer. Transformation is something that happens to her, not something she does. The great transformer is a magical helper-wanted object Edward, and, to make matters worse, he is also a vampire, a paranormal being endowed with superpowers beyond the realm of real human beings, turning the whole thing into something ludicrous. Therefore, this is an ideal impossible to be reached in real life. That is, defenselessness is impossible to be overcome, unless one ceases to be a human being, turning into that, a magical object, non-existent in reality but in fantasies and dreams. Therefore, the main character never is genuinely transformed, never cut with her childish ties of dependence and never matures. The wanted object magical helper catalyzes action. There is an unbalance between protagonist throw and wanted object since both interchange roles and functions. Even though, at the end, the protagonist turns out to be more pliable and dependent as she was at first when the story began. So then, things only worsened instead of getting better. The hero wanted object relegates to the magical helper undoing the attainment of maturity and happiness, leaving stipulated that the protagonist alone is unable to reach it herself because she unavoidably needs to be helped by something greater than what a real human being is truly. I don't know, but whoever thought this is a happy denouement, he had better to check out his or her life. As expectations, there is a slight unbalance regarding the positive and negative functions in the main seemings during the story. There is an excess of love in the pair. Love versus lovelessness, and between the actants, helper wanted object and hero. And there is also an excess of morbidity in the pair. Life versus death? How can we interpret this? The deader is the protagonist. That is, the more periled and endangered she is and closer to death, the more love she will inspire to the wanted help object. This corroborates the third more crucial pair. Helpless immature versus self-sufficient mature, in which the protagonist is overwhelmingly dependent of her protector or protectors. Not only has the helper wanted object fulfilled the function of protector catalyst, but also the father of the protagonist and the other pure helpers. There are others pairs of opposites such as young versus old, and normal versus abnormal, but these only corroborates the pathological unbalance with regard to immature to dependence hopelessness versus death. As this is a vampire story, it is natural that in it exists an imbalance. Death prevails over life, but also her dependence and absence of freedom are a remarkable sign. At the end, when all the pair of opposites in the story are balanced, we get as result an almost desirable 0. However, it is not so since there are a slight unbalance toward the negative, since the result is 3. What does that mean? It is evident that there is a morbid obsession towards supernatural and pathological love, relationships of dependence. The message that the story conveys is nothing good. Depend on others to be happy and be truly alive since on your own you are unable to achieve it. The protagonist is too helpless. She is only a nothing, unable to get love, maturity, happiness or anything by herself. Nevertheless, she is not all passive, but for the essential things in life. She is, for example, able to keep herself alive alone. When she takes the initiative, she does it wrongly during the glorifying test one. If it were not for the proverbial intervention of the wanted object helper as savior catalyzer, Bella would have found her demise since she recurs to the clique of Deus Ex Machina, avoiding a tragic denouement. In the only thing the main protagonist triumphs alone is to reveal the true nature of the magical helper wanted object Edward is. Without the intervention of the helper wanted object, the protagonist wanted object would have never overcome, nor the main test or the glorifying tests, since, during each one of them, these were surmounted thanks to Edward's intervention, leaving Bella only as a spectator of everything. The donations from which Bella was object are not because she overcame her qualifying tests, but she gets them because she inspired compassion on behalf of her too many life protectors. Without such a help, she would have perished without a doubt. In such a way, her father, mother, Edward, Jacob, the Native Americans, her friends and the Cullens are the ones who helped her survive from being so irredeemably dependent of others. Therefore, the more vulnerable she is, the more love she will awaken from her protectors. The incursion of the antagonist could have been omitted altogether. He does not constitute a real obstacle to the attainment of love or maturity, since he does not interfere in any of these things, but the only real obstacle she faces is herself. To make things worse, the helper defeats quite easily the supposed villain. He is not a real match for him and the protagonist does not do anything at all to help the helper since he does it all the work for her. Another thing, the defeat of the antagonist does not repair any significant damage or the original damage of the story, since the antagonist does not commit such a treachery but her mother. Therefore, the antagonist villain does not perform duly his function, or the protagonist hero does not do it as well, since everything during the story, the helper alone does it all and, without his divine intervention, there would not be no story whatsoever to be told. Therefore, the goal of the antagonist is not to avoid the love between the protagonist and helper-wanted object, but proving him to show if he is a worthy performer of such functions. The story without the antagonist would have been more tedious, lacking of a real conflict at all. Most of the interventions of lovelessness in the story are to be blamed to the helper. All the time, the helper-wanted object emphasizes the fact that he has doubts of exactly how to fulfill his duty as such. As he says, he fears not being able to resist the temptation to become his opposite and, instead of love defender, he would turn into a death bringer. However, this seems to be something merely to be blamed to his own crass ignorance of what love and lustful passion are, since he can distinguish between good and evil perfectly well. Edward is a perfectly well creature divided into pairs of opposites struggling between themselves to reach a perfect healthy balance, and this allows him to be happy and realized at the end. Archetypical analysis. Archetypically, the main protagonist is unable to reach the state of individuation since she never overcomes any individuation at all, nor a fiery one, ruled by the father in society, or a watery one in the belly of a whale, ruled by the mother in inward. The protagonist never learns to walk alone. She must always go accompanied by protectors, all the time. Without them, this flawed character would have died and suffered an absolute withdrawal of her libido and a general introversion. Bella, the protagonist-wanted object, and Edward, the helper-wanted object, are the main pairs of opposites. Bella represents the feminine, immaturity, lovelessness, impotence, life, warmth and light, while Edward is masculine, even though this could be objected because he is quite feminine as well. Maturity, love, self-sufficiency, darkness, absolute youngness and is master of both death and life. Both, when they join, they are conciliated, giving sense to the story. However, at the same time, it is also a curse, since alone they are condemned to be unbalanced and unwholesome, namely, suffering from neurosis, since they would sink into their respective opposite, being utterly helpless to attain the opposites that is extraneous to them. Therefore, their union is already a pathological state of codependency, none being able to survive in a world deprived of the other. The corollary seems to be that being alone in the world is tantamount to being null. We are not responsible of our happiness or our independence, but, in order to survive, we need to have a zealous protector against loneliness. In this case, it is either Bella, as father, who is at the same time a guardian of their society, or Edward or his father, other notable defender of life since he is a doctor. Edward, apparently, is an apprentice of being a champion of life, as his foster father is, and with Bella he is majoring in his greatest test. Bella is a character extremely passive. Nothing happens because she provokes it, but merely happens to her. This was the case in typical fairy tales in which heroines must have been saved by supernatural men endowed with extraordinary masculinity and power. But in all these stories these failed heroines were not the main protagonists but their respective saviors, being them merely passive objects of affection. This was because peasant girls who listened to such stories were unable to be saved by themselves, needing someone else who were extraordinary, outside of the realm of poverty and privations, to rescue them. This is exactly what happens with this sad and pathetic story. A supernatural male had to come to save her from her dysfunctional life that she's unable to fix on her own. Nothing would ever happen without Edward's intervention. Without him not even there would be a story to be told. Bella represents the longing that something wonderful would happen in our life, but it isn't our responsibility that such a thing could take place or not. It is like the revolution for communists, or the end of times. For a far right-wing conservative, all of them worry because of the monotony of their dull and null existences. In their dreary existence, reality always denies them the desperate evidence they need to prove they are right in what they think. However, they are not actually responsible whether this wonderful miracle happens or not. It would be the conclusive proof that they are right after all, but without facing to their ideological adversaries, nor suffering the anguish of a struggle of a man against another man, with the risk of losing such a fight. It is literary to admit their defeat and to be eternal children, dependent of a father or a husband, and never being responsible of the course that their fates takes, for either good or worse. This story seems to have recovered the balance when Bella finds love besides Edward. However, the danger is still latent. The forces in the story are still unbalanced. On one hand, Edward refuses to give freedom and maturity to Bella, turning her into a vampire and, therefore, making her independent and not dependent of his constant protection. In such a world, it seems to be that being human is being an eternal child. Only when we become a supernatural vampire we can be mature and individuated, which is, of course, something utterly preposterous, because this would mean that human life is pathetic and meaningless, unable to get any sort of redemption. Unless there were a fantasy in which all human limitations are surmounted. The secondary protectors are disgruntled with a contract signed by Bella with Edward and the Cullen, wishing her to be independent of them, self-sufficient, and that she could reach true individuation, and not an apparent one, because this false individuation precise of crotches to walk throughout life. Therefore, the reparation of the original damage of lovelessness that her parents' divorce caused is only apparent, namely, it is illusory. Since at any moment it could fall broken asunder, just as if it happens in the second part, New Moon, in which Edward broke the relationship and Jacob assumes the role of main protector. Afterwards, Bella can become a vampire and be self-sufficient. She would not need Edward and the Cullens anymore, but, again, this is an illusion, since that is not a real-life solution to her problems but an imaginary one, because if that were so, it would mean that Bella crossed the liminal threshold to the unconscious but never came back, getting stuck right there and never growing up, remaining a child forever or, even worse, completely withdrawn into herself, into her subconscious mind, mad and crazy. This happens when the hero has stayed too long in the magical realm and he or she has become unable to come back home, to the real harsh world. Usually, in myths the magical helper provides him or her with a horse or chariot to go back home. However, this is done with the condition of never putting his or her feet on the ground, reality, but they never tell him or her why so. Therefore, the hero breaches such contract and, immediately, he or she understands he or she had been too many years away from home and, from being a young knight or princess, they turn into a hag or an old man. In Harry Potter's saga, we see he returns to the ordinary world to live the rest of his life and he doesn't get stuck into the imaginary, unconscious world. This means he becomes mature and can deal with reality, helped with the knowledge and wisdom he learned in the imaginary realm of wizards, returning to heal the real world with this boon. Nevertheless, Bella is selfish. She retains the gift and does not share any wisdom and just keep it all for herself, getting stuck in her fantasy, unconscious, which is the same as never maturing and remaining a child forevermore, or as an alienated person. Other aspect is a lack of a real villain. This story is not about stopping a rogue vampire who is in a rampage of bloodshed, killing every human he comes against, but it is just a plot gimmick to make more interesting and less dull the ending. This story lacks of any actual conflict whatsoever, unless you consider Edward's reluctance to assume his role as Bella's keeper, but this could turn tiresome if one overdoes this ploy too much. Thence, one needs to offer another to retain the interest of the audience. Everything is solved, and it would be dreadfully dull if Bella and Edward did not face any obstacle for the fulfillment of their love. Therefore, this is only a fantasy so teenage girls, dissatisfied with their lackluster existence in her real world, find relief to their irksome existences. The moral lesson is never growing up, never letting go the fantasy of our childhood but grapple to it, as long as one can and never deal with real life as hardships. The story, instead of dealing with the empowerment of a self-sufficient girl from beginnings of the XXI century, is a story of disempowerment and retreat to a past one might think Western societies had already overcome. The protagonist girl becomes hyper-dependent of a supernatural unrealistic male, just as it has been since centuries ago. She is yet another old-fashioned damsel in distress. And, due to her dependence and immaturity, the original damage is never actually repaired. She changed her dependence from her parents to the dependence to the Cullens clan and Edward's, like many centuries ago. Their supernatural powers, at the ending when all is said and done, are too good to be true. The girl becomes reliant on the whims of her male to which she has accepted to be self-submitted, which is truly a sheer case of postmodern self-enslaving in our new and grandiose society.